Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. All modern hospitals have one thing in common. Life there has a special rhythm. Although the interiors are sterile, the environment changes every second of the day and night. From the outside, this heavy traffic may seem akin to Brennan's, but at a closer look, even a person far from medicine will realize how calibrated the algorithm of hospital life. Stephen felt like a fish out of water when he first arrived at the hospital. He had given more than 20 years to his favorite profession and knew perfectly well how this complex mechanism called a multidisciplinary clinic worked. And he was very proud of the fact that he was one of the cogs of this system. The doctor also liked to philosophize about his purpose in this troubled world. In the circle of colleagues, the man liked to repeat our mission to meet a new life. And that's fine. When you hold a little person in your arms, you feel like God, if not God, then his special representative on earth. It's a unique feeling. That morning, Stephen was also thinking about it, because he was about to perform a major operation to save another little life. He was already heading towards the opera block, as a dimensional figure of an older nurse, Camille Hold, suddenly appeared on his way. "We'll have to postpone the operation for a while. Were you required by the chief to take such liberties with a junior in rank?" Could well be construed as a breach of medical ethics. But in a lifeline clinic, in exceptional cases, it was allowed. All the more so for Camille, the oldest woman on the ward. She regarded everyone as her children, and she talked to the whole staff in that way. The most interesting thing is that doctors and nurses saw this good-natured woman as a second mother. Many shared secrets with her, and some even cried on her shoulder, and the head nurse found the right words for everyone. Noticing that the doctor hesitated, Camille repeated the address, but a tone louder. "But why are you frozen? Run to the chief on the carpet. He has something urgent to do with you. I told him we have women on the operating table. The situation is critical. And he wants Kazansky to see me. Don't worry about it. I've already warned Brown." That news has calmed the doctor down a bit. She hasn't left yet. "Thank you. You're our lifesaver. Only instead of a fairy costume, I'm wearing a sterile gown that repels not only bacteria, but also cute elves." The woman made an expressive gesture with her hand and continued along the usual route. Stephen hurried to the elevator. The office of the chief was a floor above. There was a small queue in the reception area, and the receptionist looked at the newcomer with undisguised displeasure. She immediately pressed the selector button. "Christopher is here." "Good, I understand you." The sour expression was instantly replaced by a duty smile. "Is the chief expecting you? Come on in." Stephen had time to think that this nice girl should work in the theater, not in a medical institution. Only good actors can change their faces that fast. Christopher was talking to someone on the phone. He nodded the visitor to a chair and continued talking. "Don't worry, Rick, everything will be fine. But even a good doctor can't account for all the pitfalls. I'm not making excuses." "You got that right." Stephen realized the supervisor was talking to the supervisor and forgot to make sense. The man put the receiver on the machine. Then with a handkerchief he brushed the sweat off his forehead. "Here you, staffers, do not even suspect what labor is not worth defending you. But the most interesting thing is that you don't even appreciate it. You think I'm a hardened bureaucrat." For a minute there, Stephen felt sorry for him. Not a bad man, in principle, with whom he had more than just an official relationship. After all, Christopher was the father of his wife. That is, in the circle of the closest relatives. But at work it was not supposed to remember about it. So the doctor limited himself to the standard form of sympathy. "Christopher, we appreciate and respect you. But I'd like to know why you called me in on such short notice." "I have a patient in surgery." The chief grimaced. "I understand your outrage, but I ordered Brown to replace you. She can handle it. I have no doubt that Emily can handle it. But the man's been off duty 24 hours. It's no big deal. It's not the first time she's been married. It's what we do. You take it easy. Do you need your help? I can't get anyone else to do it because you're the only one with a good mouth. I don't get it. Explain more. The chief waved his hand dismissively. You see, I'm also under pressure from above. I got a call from the region. They want an interview for television. And you know what my relationship with these sharks of the pen is like, don't you? But Christopher canceled the operation for the sake of talking to journalists. Yes, some tests. First of all, nobody canceled anything. And secondly, for the sake of the image of the institution, you can sacrifice something. I mean, it's all about PR. What did you think? Market conditions demand that without this, as you say, PR, we will remain in the backyard. You think I'm comfortable with that? I'm a doctor, and I'm supposed to be doing this kind of crap. Christopher was really going at it. It was obvious that he had a lot on his mind, too. And Stephen once again felt a pang of pity for this not young man. All right, I'll give the damn interview when the reporter shows up. You're glad he's here. He's already here, waiting for you and your resident. But it's a girl, and she's quite pretty. Just make sure you don't get too comfortable. Stephen stared at the chief in bewilderment. Are you saying there's an unauthorized person in my ward at this moment? I know it's a breach of regulations, but the press representative asked me very much, begged me to let her experience the working atmosphere of the maternity ward. But we can make an exception. No, Christopher, you can't. I'll take questions, but she's not going to get past the sterile barrier. And I'm not going to disrupt the regimen because someone else wants to. We don't have enough hospital-acquired infections. I don't have the authority to order it. You're in charge. It's your call. Stephen felt his nerves clench into springs. He was already imagining how he was going to put this as yet unknown journalist in her place. With anger, the doctor's fists clenched automatically, so he had to catch his breath a little before entering the residence room. It turned out that a whole group of television employees were waiting for him. A cameraman was indifferently checking the equipment, and a skinny girl in a ridiculous blouse with huge flowers was writing something in a notebook. Another older woman with a neat suitcase sat on a sofa. Seeing this company, Stephen could hardly restrain himself from the harshest words. He called the nurse on duty. Why are they without gowns? What kind of vigilantism is this? The girl with the notebook. She answered for the nurse. Don't scold the nurse. It's not her fault. We've done away with the gowns. I have to be on camera all the time, and the cameraman is just uncomfortable in a gown. The doctor's cup of patience was overflowing, and he lashed out at the uninvited guests. Who are you to give orders around here? Do you realize that this is a maternity ward, and here is a special regime? Therefore, all outsiders are a danger to the lives of moms and babies. The girl barely reached the doctor's shoulder. She obviously did not expect such an outburst of anger on his part. She started stuttering out of fright. But I didn't know it was so serious. We just wanted to do a live shot. Don't even dream about it. And anyway, didn't they teach you in your office that before you go to the object, you should first study its features? Maiden nervously rubbed her wet blouse with thin fingers, and her voice trembled with excitement. Yes, I've been warned. But I didn't think it was that serious. I need to get the material done soon. It's a miracle. You see, she has an emergency. The girl is a special needs institution, while Stephen brought the inexperienced journalist up to speed. A nurse brought gowns for the entire creative team. The woman, the valise, and the cameraman quickly paid for themselves in white robes. The girl followed their example as well. But from confusion, her hands were shaking badly, and she could not get into the sleeves of the protective clothing in any way. The doctor felt embarrassed for his not too friendly attitude towards the TV crew. He decided to help the girl who was ready to cry. She gratefully accepted the help. Thank you, Stephen. You see, this is the first time I've been assigned to do serious reporting. I just wanted it to be at the highest level. I know exactly what you mean. I was young and inexperienced myself. No offense, but I want to give you some useful advice. As you call the girl by her first name, she became Evelyn. You mean Evelyn. That's very nice. So, Evelyn, I advise you in the future to specify everything to the details, even before you start work. I don't know who you agreed with, but I had to transfer my patient to another doctor because of your unexpected visit, and I can see that I'll have to cancel my plans for the whole day. That's the unfortunate story. The journalist Evelyn asked in a pathetic, childish way. I'm sorry, please, honestly. I didn't realize it was so serious. Stephen noticed that the other members of the group remained silent during the conversation. It didn't escape his gaze. What's on the face of the bag lady? A gloating expression froze. Only the cameraman was still staring blankly out of the window. The doctor mentally concluded, wow, it seems that intrigue is rampant in the creative field too. Did these two best carp know exactly what they were up to? And deliberately set the girl up for a hit. But the doctor kept his thoughts to himself and said aloud a common phrase. Father Frost, translated from Latin, is the oldest language, which is still used in medicine. Cicero's phrase means what times are like today. So let's cut to the chase. The girl was pleased, smiled, gave signs of activity, and the operator. Only the lady with the briefcase remained in the same position. Evelyn reprimanded her. We're on it. Clean up my face. I was a little nervous. And the doctor had a forehead and cheekbones too. Don't push me. Girl, I can see perfectly well. I was struck by the lady's voice. He was thinking of asking if she was not voicing old lady Shapokliak or grandmother Yaga at the studio, but he held back in time. The person named Clara opened her casket and got down to business. I must say, she was very skillfully wielding all sorts of meters and brushes. Then the cameraman determined convenient places for shooting. The girl Evelyn asked the standard questions. Stephen was surprised to recognize that she worked very professionally. She never once looked into her notebook, but asked more questions as the conversation progressed. The competent actions of the young journalist bribed the doctor. But was there something else special about this girl that made his heart tingle? Evelyn, for obvious reasons, I can't take you to the delivery room, but we can visit the Happy Moms together. I'll just let the nurses know. By the way, feeding time is coming up, but we're strictly on the clock, so you can film some very touching scenes. Thank you. That's great. The girl jumped up on the spot with delight. Clara Modesto threw an unkind look in her direction. Stephen was sure that the Sorpus would snitch on the girl, but he did not speak out loud. The interview took almost 2 o'clock. Saying goodbye to the guests, Stephen saw Brown walk tiredly out of the operating room. She waved hello to him. Everything is all right. The doctor did not hold back and reproachfully addressed the journalist. While we were talking to you, my colleague saved 2 lives at once. These are the heroes of our time. They are the ones you should be reporting on. After a minute, he regretted what he had said and did not take out his notebooks and began to quickly write something in it. Clara watched her with undisguised dislike. The cameraman and makeup artist hurried to the elevator. I didn't stay long. Stephen, I wanted to ask you something else, not for the interview. Go ahead. I'd be happy to answer your question, as long as it's not about my personal life. It's a little concerning. Tell me, did you immediately decide to become a doctor, or did you dream of another profession? No, this path was predetermined by fate itself. My mom spent almost 40 years in medicine, and I just couldn't choose another profession. One more question. Yes, where did you start practicing medicine? Well, usually after college, they send everyone away. That's what happened to me too. I had to work for 2 years in a wonderful town with the romantic name of Kamishin. Evelyn jumped for joy again. What a coincidence. My relatives live in Kamishin. You're from there too. Stephen did not like that the girl was interested in such details. He evasively answered no. I only practiced there, but that was a long time ago. More than 20 years ago. To be honest, I've already forgotten what the town looks like. Stephen twisted his heart because he often recalled his early years in a small town in the countryside. It was the annoying journalist who had stirred up something in his soul that he had been hiding all these years. Stephen had always considered himself a capital city dweller, although his childhood and youth were spent in the Moscow suburbs. However, in Liberty, all the guys considered themselves cool, and there were many reasons for this. But the main thing is that it was in this city that the Lube band appeared. Therefore, all residents from preschoolers to old people were proud of their compatriotism with the popular collective. Stephen was also a fan of musicians, but at that time to get a ticket to a concert of Lube was unrealistic. For two reasons, the fabulous price and the limited number of tickets themselves. But the most difficult thing was finances. In the family, apart from Stephen, there were two younger brothers. And the only breadwinner was the mother. Jenna worked as a midwife, and to feed her boys, she was at the hospital 24 hours a day. But even working two jobs couldn't cover all the expenses. At first, the father sent child support, and then he disappeared without a trace. One day, Stephen found a letter with a strange stamp in the drawer of his dresser. And reading it, he realized that his father is in places very remote. He never told anyone about this fact from his biography. And then, when he received a passport, he took his mother's maiden name. But Jenna, despite the workload, knew perfectly well about the hobbies of her sons because she tried to be aware of the affairs of each. One day, she suggested to the eldest, "Stephen, to us temporarily to work in the emergency room is required in the nursing department. You only have to work 2 night shifts a week. If you want, I can arrange to take you on weekends. You can earn some money for your pocket money." The young man agreed right away. After a month, he was so absorbed in his work that he decided to become a doctor, even though his first salary was small. He was able to buy a ticket to see his favorite band. There was still money left over for candy for his younger brothers and flowers for his mom. Jenna, from the excess of feelings, even wept. "Edichka, I haven't even noticed how you've grown up. You're already earning your own money." Encouraged by his first success, the boy assured his mother that this was just the beginning. "Mom, I will definitely become a doctor and will get good money." The woman cried even more. "Son, to get into the institute, you need to have a blat or a certificate with only A's. And you have neither. And there's no one to help us. Our family is all poor. Stephen, hug. Don't cry. And believe me, I'll get in. There must be a dynasty of Kazan doctors." Jenna laughed. "I'm not a doctor, midwife. I mean, it's the middle tier. And why are you talking about Kazans? It was my last name before I got married. Mom, I decided to take your last name. Here's the passport." The woman looked at the document and couldn't find words. "Son, but it's not allowed. According to the law, children must take their father's name." "Mom, you're wrong. A child has the right to choose any surname of his parents. I've decided I'm going to be a Kazan dynasty." "Sounds great. Didn't you say my grandfather was in medicine?" "Yes, he was a paramedic, and Mom was a professor at the pharmacy. So you see, it's a dynasty. Don't worry about getting in. There's still time for me to do better in my studies." Stephen didn't have a problem with his studies. He was considered one of the best students in the school. But still, he couldn't get a red certificate. He spent the rest of the year studying hard. And as a result, he received a document with only 1 B. Teachers were amazed at the boy's ambition. What a good boy. Too bad he got a B in math. Well, Stephen was not upset about it. He was sure that he would definitely get in at the first attempt. Probably, it was this confidence that gave him strength during the entrance exams. When he saw his name on the list of students, his excitement eased. But the purposeful young man also did not allow new results. All the years of student life, the guy also devoted to study. He did not go to discos and did not even meet with girls, although they were very actively trying to win his favor. When the guys joked about this, he cheerfully replied, "Finish the institute to make up for lost time. I will have a temporary harem, and a whole week will devote to a body life. In the meantime, you have to sacrifice something for a bright future, to make it easier on Mom." Stephen was working part-time at the clinic as an orderly. His past experience helped him a lot. His older coworkers used to tease him all the time. "Student, where did you learn all this stuff? You can already be trusted with a scalpel." Of course, the praise was pleasant to the guy, but he never turned up his nose. In his third year, he decided to choose ecology. Fellow students, they made fun of him. Stephen is not a man's business. But the guy was convinced that gender does not affect the choice of specialization. After all, for the sick doctor is a helper and savior. And whether he is a man or a woman does not matter. Stephen was sure that he would get on distribution in one of the capital's hospitals, but admitted that in the worst-case scenario, he would have to work for a couple of years in a polyclinic. But the promising student did not expect that he would be sent into exile in the unfamiliar city of Kamishin. When he learned about his unenviable fate, he almost cried. The most surprising thing is that he was the outsider, because other guys from the course, who skipped lectures and passed the state exams worse than him, were luckier. His fellow students openly laughed at him. John Williams, whose dad ran the clinic, made fun of him. But what? You don't always get the lucky ticket. Sometimes you don't. You've been listening to your brain for years, and you have to go to the woodshed. But don't despair. People live in the provinces too. There's even a club with dancing to the accordion and a bathhouse with a store. How will you settle down? Let me know. Stephen couldn't stand those arrogant guys. Often they almost got into fights, and John was always the provocateur. Fellow students tried not to hurt him, were afraid of the high position of Father Williams. Stephen, too, for many 6 years restrained himself. But having received hard labor assignments, he forgot about conventionality. Celebrating victory early. You don't know where you'll be a year from now. You're as dumb as a jackass, only thanks to your daddy. But it's dangerous to let you near the sick, because your name is Dr. Death. Witnesses to this verbal altercation held their stomachs. Well done. You got Williams on 5. That's an interesting nickname for him. With Stephen's hand, the nickname Dr. Death has indeed been firmly planted on John. So you could say he was taking revenge on his enemies. He considered for himself humiliating the prospect of working 2 years in the province. For 2 days, the boy was not himself. He could not dare to tell his mother that he would have to go to Mutarakan. But it was impossible to hide anything from Jenna. "Son, you're walking around like you're in the water. Have you already had your assignment?" Stephen lowered his head. Mom had. "So, nothing good. I was sent to the glorious city of Kamishin." Stephen expected anything: tears, righteous, maternal anger, words, sympathy. But Jenna's reaction struck him dead. The mother glowed with happiness. "That's good, son. The conventional wisdom is that working in the provinces is humiliating, and the most mediocre medical graduates are sent there. But as life shows, it is in rural areas and small towns is the best place to start practicing. After all, a young specialist immediately gets to the front line. He will have to take responsibility and make decisions himself. And for a doctor, it is the most important thing. The city with a picturesque name met the young doctor is not welcoming, like a bucket of rain was pouring. So there were puddles everywhere, more resembling lakes. Until Stephen reached the local hospital, he was washed up to nothing. But the personal loss was insignificant compared to what lay ahead of him. The hospital building looked bleak and even scary. The interior also left an unpleasant impression of linoleum floors, iron beds with netting, and broken furniture. A frightened middle-aged woman reported to an elderly paramedic who volunteered to be his guide for a while. "Sam, I was left here on duty. Where did they all go?" The woman's eyes widened. "Sam, are you asking stupid questions? People are digging potatoes. It's raining like a bucket. Now the sky is cracked, but this morning it was fine." The woman looked at Sam as if she was seeing him for the first time. The man felt uncomfortable in front of the young specialist and tried to justify the actions of his colleagues. "Do not think, Stephen. We have a good, very friendly team." "Yes, that's what I noticed. Friendly. Tell me, Sam, what if there's an emergency?" "Well, God forbid, of course. bleeding, or even a hypertensive crisis, what will the guard do then? The paramedic blushed. Then the cough is gone. We have developed a special algorithm. If something happens, calls the doctor on duty. Wow, you even have a doctor. Good thing I won't be here alone. The paramedic proudly pointed out that we have 7 doctors on our staff, but only half of them are employed. Do not think. We are not some backward hospital of Sarah's times, but quite a modern institution. Only our funding is poor. But that's for now. Wendy decided to support her colleague. Don't be afraid, dear man. We have good people working for us. And when we need to cover up, I always hand them all over. Who are you? Stephen thought Wendy was a nurse and asked her a question just to be on the safe side. But what was his surprise when the woman shook her head proudly. Kudryashov replied, "And I'm a junior physician's assistant." Stephen felt his lower jaw slowly dropping. He looked at the embarrassed Sam. "Oh, you guys. So, everyone's off to the potato patch," and left the orderlies on the lookout. Wendy, but it offended the new doctor. "Am I not a human being? Maybe I know more than you do. I've been in a lot of binds. I can take a plaster cast and give a shot if they ask me to. What else can we do? How many doctors have been in our hospital?" Tell Sam. But many were young and eager, but none stayed long. Wendy decided to put an end to the argument. "And I don't know what to call you. You'll find it in a year or two, too. Okay, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna clean up before dinner's served." The tour of the hospital ended with a visit to the food block. Sam was visibly animated and praised the cooks at every turn. "Girls, we have such masters that as in a fairy tale they make soup from an axe. Valuable personnel. And you, remember, what is your duty to take a sample? Food." The unit was on the fringe in the furthest corner of the hospital grounds. At first, Stephen thought it was a garage or a warehouse, but when he realized it was a moss-covered building where food was prepared, he couldn't help himself. "Tell me, dear Sams, did they happen to make war movies in this set? Hospital." The tour guide took offense. "Why don't you like it? We have a normal hospital. Thanks for that." In the neighboring district, the building has completely collapsed. Now they take their sick and laboring women to us. Even so, I didn't think there could be anything worse than this pathetic spectacle. Sam the paramedic took even more offense. "Yes. Do you know what kind of people worked here? Real surgeons, top-notch. They did surgeries that you can't get in a hospital in the capital. If you like it here, you can get out of here. We're not keeping anyone." Stephen realized that he had offended an elderly paramedic who had worked in this hospital all his life. He apologized to him for a long time. And then he took the keys to the service apartment and went to the wooden building where Sam pointed to the glorious town of Kemishin. He was preparing new surprises for the young doctor. The wooden structure turned out to be a dormitory family-type room in which Stephen was to live. Also caused complete disappointment. The only thing that pleased him was hot water and a bathroom. Before he could look around, there was a knock on the door. "Come in." The young man expected to see anyone but a pretty girl. "Hello. Congratulations on moving in. I'm your neighbor, Vanessa." The girl confidently extended her hand. Stephen was confused for a moment. "And I'm Stephen." That is, Stephen had just arrived today to serve at the local medical center. I have to admit, I still can't get over the shock. It's not surprising. I was in the same state for a while. But I got used to it. I'm thankful they gave me a place to live, or I'd have had to wander around in dark apartments. We're not coworkers by any chance, are we? I've only been working here a couple months. I was assigned to this dump right out of college. You won't believe it, but I sat there for a week. I even had bad thoughts. Vanessa laughed. "It's a joke in this nice town. Only black thoughts come into your head. Of course, one gets used to everything, but I'm not going to stay here for long. I'll work my ass off and look for a better place." The whole evening the unhappy neighbors spent together. Vanessa fed the newly arrived doctor a delicious borscht, since it was the first time they had met. They decided to cement their acquaintance with a bottle of champagne. In the evening, Vanessa suggested that maybe we could go for a little walk before going to bed. I have to go on duty tomorrow morning, and I can't get used to the new place. I'm not sleeping well. As a Dutch gentleman should, Stephen volunteered to escort the girl. The weather was fine, and only huge puddles reminded of the recent rain. The streets were quiet and deserted. Only rare couples in the arms of passers-by were walking along the park path. Stephen felt cozy in the company of this girl. Vanessa, do you happen to have a feeling that we have met before? A little bit. But scientists attribute this phenomenon to the same psychotype of people. Vanessa, how you've just ruthlessly cut short my fantasies. I was already immersed in romantic reveries. I'm a realist, even a pragmatist. Do you remember the catchphrase about living life without pain? Well, yes, so that it doesn't hurt and resent wasted time. That's why I already have everything scheduled for several years ahead from the drum. I'll find a good job in the city. Perhaps I'll study further. Get married when all girls dream of getting married. Vanessa laughed. I also have this point in mind. But I won't marry the first man I meet. Excuse me for an indiscreet question, but what candidates will be considered? Only prospective ones. It may sound rude, but I don't need a simple man who works at a machine or drives for a meager salary. I see. Do you dream, as many girls do, of marrying rich men? I think they call them oligarchs nowadays. No, I'm not looking for a purse on legs, but financial stability never hurts. And the main thing, I dream to meet an established man, so that he had a good job, his own place, and other basics. And you will not be bored. Why, following your example, Vanessa, I will also refer to psychologists. So they say that when a person lives in full prosperity, he becomes wildly bored. I won't be bored. They walked until almost midnight. When they were walking back to the dormitory, Stephen noticed the silhouette of a man. Vanessa said grudgingly, "There goes that Robert again." Stephen grinned at the groomer. "Kind of like that one. I don't know where to hide from him." The guy noticed the approaching couple and immediately boiled. "Vanessa, who the fuck is this guy? Robert, what kind of language is that?" "It's not a Dutch. Our new doctor came from Moscow. So you're happy with the capital's cockhole, and you don't care about Robert." Vanessa wanted to say something, but Stephen beat her to it. He was much stronger and taller than Robert, and he deftly lifted him off the ground. "Look, young man, if I hear one more rude word about my neighbor and my colleague." The kid got away with what? It was nothing. "I'll give you a nail enema." Vanessa burst out laughing, and Robert flapped his eyes in confusion. "What do you mean with nails? Are there such enemas?" "They do, but they're done for prophylactic purposes." Robert left the scene of the fight, but he came right back. "Hey, Doc, that's my girl. I see you around her again. You're on your own. And I don't give a damn about your medical stuff like enemas and nails." It was a night Stephen would remember for the rest of his life. For Vanessa, it was also a landmark. Now, after her shift, she was in a hurry to get home, and in the evening she waited for her neighbor to return from work. Unhappy Robert was suffering from unrequited love alone on a bench near the dormitory. Stephen felt sorry for the guy, and he once said to Vanessa, "Are you sure that everything in your life will go according to the pre-scheduled plan? Don't you think that one day will come, you're gonna regret ever turning that guy down?" "That could happen. But I don't see that man around me." "You're wrong. At first I thought this Robert was a hapless kid too, but it turns out he's a real hero." "What do you mean?" "I mean, he risked his life to save a fellow worker. They had an accident in the shop, and a man was almost crushed by a stove. And Robert reacted, got hurt himself, and saved his comrade from imminent death." The girl looked at Stephen with surprise. "Where did you get this information?" "From our hospital, I guess. Your Robert was brought in while I was on duty. You know that every doctor in our hospital is a handyman. I had to take over as surgeon yesterday, so I treated Robert for a while. Anyway, I put him in the ward. Maybe you'd like to visit him. Let the kid enjoy himself. Neighbors didn't see each other for a long time because their work schedules didn't match. It was only 3 weeks later that Stephen came face to face with Vanessa in the kitchen. The girl was excited to see him. Listen, we live in the same apartment, but we don't see each other for weeks. For friendship's sake, you'd take me to your ward. I heard you guys are having maternity leave. Yeah. But you know, Vanessa, it's just a matter of not having a full complement of staff. For example, I've learned almost every related specialty in a few months. Can you fill in for a midwife? Oh, I'm probably not right for it. I can navigate an operating room with my eyes closed. Delivering a baby is a big responsibility. It's always like that when you start poaching staff. It's a bummer. I'm also in favor of getting out of here as soon as possible. I don't know yet. Vanessa, have you changed your plans? The girl was embarrassed on her face. A bright blush appeared. I have some, by the way, thanks to you. I'm not going to guess yet, but maybe I'll invite you to the wedding soon. That's interesting. Who's the lucky guy? Rude Robert. Stephen slyly looked at her, but could not stand it and laughed. Vanessa looked so embarrassed. You hit the spot. But he's really not a bad guy, and his parents are really nice. By the way, Robert's mom is a teacher, and he's so rude. That's skewed. That's what your favorite psychologists explain. They think it's because of childhood complexes, but I'm very happy for you. Just hurry up with the wedding, or I'll be gone. A man promised to pull me out of this swamp called Kamishin, and as you know, that's what I want more than anything. Stephen did not lie to the neighbor. The prospect of returning to the capital really existed. For several months, the young doctor worked without weekends, and when a lot of heads accumulated, he decided to visit his mother in the electric train. He ran into John Williams quite by accident. He was delighted to see you. What are you doing here? Honestly, I'm very happy to see you, and I repent for treating you unfairly. You know, even a year can make a man wise. Tell me, how are you doing in your John in Kamishin? You don't even realize what a shithole it is, but when you don't have the basic things you need to work, you want to cry. I have the feeling that no one in that godforsaken place has ever heard of modern medicine. Yes, this is the situation everywhere. Of course, in the capital it's a little easier, but we have to beat out even ordinary bandages. My father comes every day from work as a psychologist. He's in charge now, but you can be patient for such a position. What about your sister? I dated her for a while when I was young. And then the girl found a more affluent beau for herself. John scratched the back of his head. Jack, as usual, waiting for her prince. She had a fiancé who looked like a prince. He was, but he went to the States. Her sister suffered for a long time because he didn't take her with him. Now she's looking again. By the way, can you try to rekindle the relationship? I'm sorry, John, but you can't step in the same river twice. I think you'll agree with me on that one. I couldn't agree with you more. And my sister's no picnic. Personally, I'd run 10 kilometers without looking back. I don't envy anyone who has to live under the same roof with her. They chatted for a while, recalled some student life jokes. And John gave him a booby-trapped square. It's my business card. Now all decent guys have one. It's got all the coordinates. I hope you got a grave. No, I've only seen a picture of one. And my salary can't buy such an expensive thing. Don't be pompous. They say they pay doctors well in the countryside. That's just a rumor. But in reality, it's a pittance. A doctor's rate is more or less the same. Nurses and orderlies. My neighbor is an operating room nurse. She can work with her eyes closed. Maybe she's afraid to get paid. John pushed Stephen. Nice neighbor. She's all right. Only she's getting married soon. Too bad. I would have come to visit. Vanessa went about the apartment like a butterfly. Stephen watched her cooking with a smile. On the one hand, he was happy for his neighbor and irrepressible Robert, but at the thought that Vanessa was getting married, he felt sad. So he carefully avoided meeting with the girl one-on-one. For a while he succeeded, but one evening Vanessa herself knocked at the door of his room. "Stephen, don't you think we need to have a serious talk?" The young man was silent. He was afraid and waiting for this conversation. He was afraid because he could not understand his feelings. "Why don't you say anything? You do realize that sometimes one word, one move can solve everything. I don't want to make a fatal mistake. I don't want that either." Suddenly, Vanessa started to cry. She spoke loudly and desperately. "But why? Why do you bear all this in silence? Why do you let me go out with this Robert? He is kind and very good, but I don't love him. You see, I dream about you every night. You have no idea how many times I've stood breathlessly at your door, afraid you'd chase me away." The flow of reproaches was interrupted by a long kiss. The lovers lost track of time. They forgot about everything in the world and hugged each other and fell asleep only in the morning. Vanessa was the first to jump up. "I think I overslept," Stephen said. "I'm on duty too." Vanessa admired his pumped-up torso. "Oh, what's that?" "It's a birthmark on all the men. My grandfather had a big one. My younger brothers also have one." Vanessa's eyes are on fire again. "Let's call the hospital and say we've caught the plague and we're quarantined." "No, I don't want the plague. Let's just keep it simple." "All right, fine. Then it's chicken pox and dysentery or rubella." "Vanessa, stop scaring me with scary infections or I'll run away from you." "You won't. I'll find you by your birthmark and I'll get you out of the ground." In a burst of happiness, the couple completely forgot about Robert. Only on the doorstep of the apartment, Vanessa remembered her fiancé and said firmly, "There will be no wedding." "Stephen, I'm right." The man was confused. "I don't know yet. Everything happened so spontaneously. I must have misspoken. There will be a wedding, but not with Robert. I mean, we're together now and forever." To avoid answering the question, Stephen kissed his beloved. And at night, when he was returning from duty, near the entrance, someone came at him from behind and knocked him to the ground. From his breathing and the blows that were coming at him from different directions, the doctor realized that at least 3 people were torturing him. Before he lost consciousness, he heard Vanessa screaming, "What are you assholes doing? Leave him alone." After that, Stephen fell into a void where it was very dark. The whole battered body was pierced with pain. The first thing Stephen woke up to was Vanessa's crying face. "Honey, I'm sorry, it's all my fault." Then came the face of the district attorney. "The doctors did a great job on you. You can talk. Who attacked you? We'll draw up a report." Stephen tried to speak, but he was immediately pierced by pain. He whispered quietly, "There's no need for a report. I treated myself while I was being treated." "Precinct officers." The doctor was indignant. "Do you realize that by your refusal you are encouraging criminals? I will not write and sign anything. Everything happened by accident." The policemen left with nothing. Vanessa stayed at the doctor's bedside for days. She spoon-fed him, tried to support him in every possible way. But the most important thing the man learned from her was that the girl canceled the wedding. "We're getting married now." But the doctor was silent. The girl thought that it was just hard for him to talk. Then she asked him the question several times, but he always answered evasively. "Of course, Vanessa, you and I will marry, but we must wait a little longer. I'm not quite strong enough yet. Why would you want such a useless husband? I'll faint at the most important moment." Vanessa understood the joke and waited for her lover to decide on an important step. But days went by and nothing changed. Stephen understood perfectly well that it could not go on like this. One day, when Vanessa was at work, he found John's business card and called his home phone. Tho answered right away. "It's a good thing you called. As they say, the catcher flees the beast. I was about to put out a BOLO. There's an opening at my dad's clinic. Listen, thanks. I didn't expect that. But how? I've got a settlement to make. I've got some errands to run. If you don't show up tomorrow morning, there's another candidate. There's a lot of applicants for this position. As long as you're a resident, you could be chief. So doesn't it matter? Stephen rushed to the hospital. He applied for the settlement, explaining the urgency with his mother's illness. He was embarrassed to lie, but there was no other way out. Returning to his bachelor's den, he also hastily began to pack his things, hoping that he would be able to escape before Vanessa returned. But she had returned from work early. Seeing the packed suitcases, the girl realized everything. "Stephen, what happened? Have you thought about what's going to happen to me? I mean, everyone's gonna be pointing fingers at me." Vanessa was not crying, but there was so much despair and longing in her voice that the man felt uncomfortable. He tried to hug her, and she snuggled into his shoulder. "You promised to get married. You're running around on your own." He stroked her back like a baby. "Vanessa, you know, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I can't take you with me just yet. I have no one in the capital. I'll have to find an apartment. And then, what if I'm not a worthy candidate for you?" He lowered his eyes for a few minutes. There was silence in the room. Then the young doctor resolutely took up his suitcases. "Sorry, I'm in a hurry." He jogged down from the second floor. With the same accelerated step, he reached the train station. Only in the train carriage did he catch his breath. The man felt his face burning with fire, and his heart was torn by remorse. The train was taking him away to a new life, and the wheels backed up all the way. "You're a scoundrel. You're a scoundrel." It wasn't until years later that he realized that day was the black day of his shame. But Stephen constantly chased away the intrusive thoughts of going back and finding Vanessa. He tried to forget the girl who had believed him, but fate had a vengeance on him for that deed. The TV was on again, and Stephen sat motionless, staring at the plasma screen. "Stephen, you're all right." He snapped his fingers near his nose. The man roughly withdrew his wife's hand. "What kind of stupid behavior is this? I'm not a rabbit to test my reflexes on. Something's starting to kick in at half speed. Because I want to rest. You torment me with your endless questions, Stephen. But that's understandable. I'm not a stranger. I'm your lawfully wedded wife." The woman froze for a moment. "Look, maybe you have someone else." And I missed the point. Stephen stood up and walked past his wife, but she followed him. "And I'm waiting for an answer. Jean, you only have one thing on your mind. I remember you weren't interested in me before. Why the sudden change? You know, I got bored. My daughter grew up. My dog got stolen from me. So it's just you." The man was pouring tea at the time. "You're doing great, so I was lower on your priority list than your dog," Zhana Kristinovna remarked defiantly, "but you claim to be more than that." The woman poured tea too and sat down on the soft couch. "More than that. It's not your stubbornness that amazes me, but how people quickly become ungrateful. Do I owe you anything? Of course you do. My father and brother had a part in your fate. If it weren't for them, you'd still be in Kamyshin, and you'd be married to some Tolstoy of a collective farmer. Zhana, for your information, collective farms were abolished a long time ago. Kamyshin must have changed too. And about my marriage, you've made up your own mind. Nobody dragged you to the registry office. You're talking like that. You're ahead of yourself. So, what a modest young man you were when you wanted a better position. Stop it. You had nothing to do with this. Christopher helped me. And in return, I married you. Otherwise, Kavala would still be sitting on old cases, so as not to further inflame an already heated atmosphere. Stephen threw on his cloak and closed the door of the country mansion behind him. Jean did not like the hustle and bustle of the city and preferred to spend the summer and fall in the elite village. Although Stephen also liked the quiet life, but on the road, to work and back had to spend several hours every day. After a quarrel with his wife, he also decided to ventilate. Driven by some inner voice, he went to Paveletsky Station. In the train schedule, he found a familiar name and asked at the information desk, "How can I get to Kamyshin? There are direct flights." The girl looked at him strangely, as if he was asking not about provincial Russian cities, but about some island in the Pacific Ocean. Our schedule hasn't changed for years. That's why it's all accurate. The man realized that he was displeased with the woman on duty because he was bothering her. He didn't want to go home, so he wandered around the city until almost midnight. Jean did not even call. Anger at his wife had not yet passed, and he swore quite loudly. Well, and sit stupid not in four walls. Enjoy your loneliness. For the night, he rented a room in a hotel, where he slept well. And in the morning, forgetting about the scandal with his wife, he went to the clinic. No sooner had he gotten to the ward. Camille, the head nurse, said in an announcer's voice, "Stephen, the head nurse wants to see you." "Ah, okay, I'm on my way. I hope I don't have to deal with the TV crew this time. I don't know. But Christopher is definitely in a bad mood today. Thanks to our good fairy for the warning. Chief Thunder and Lightning. Stephen, what's up? Where have you been all night? The gray in my beard and the devil in my ribs. What's the matter, Christopher? How could I? I was just staying at a hotel so as not to provoke my wife into a conflict. You should be talking to her, not me. You didn't tell me what to do. You'll be on the street in no time. Don't you scare me. Christopher's bad, and times ain't what they used to be. I've been invited to other clinics many times, so Vanessa's lifeline is not the end of the line." He's talking. Application on the table. Stephen replied with a sneer. "You got it, Gov." Not 5 minutes later, he returned to the chief's office with his resignation letter. Without raising his eyes from the desk, he signed it. "Get out of here. What's the name of the town? Where did I pull you from? Reeves? Almost there. Camishan. Here we go. No one is allowed to behave like that to my daughter." Stephen turned toward the door. Now he felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. After living with Jean for so many years, he felt that he had never become a real member of the Williams family. It wasn't that he wasn't accepted, but rather that he wasn't particularly eager to be watered. Ideally, he was expected to be silent, obedient, not to cross Jean, to do whatever Jean's father told him to do. But Stephen didn't want to, and he always had an opinion, and he really didn't like that. They're not her dads. At work, they sort of got along, but only because Christopher had to admit Stephen was a good doctor, had to admit it, but he never said it out loud. "You know, Christopher, I should thank you now that we're breaking up when I'm still in my prime. I mean, I'll still have a job and a family. It's high time you took a well-deserved vacation with Jean's grandchildren. You'll never get any, because it's too late. She won't even marry again, because no one needs her. She wasn't even needed then. But I had to pay the price for my desire to change jobs. The price is very high. By the way," Christopher jumped out of her chair. "Out," Stephen hummed and walked out. He felt so good after he had said it all. He was walking down the hall, and he wanted to boo. Of course, at that moment he ran into Camille. "So what happened that you're smiling after going to the chief?" He rounded on the head nurse. "The best thing that could have happened, Camille." She looked at him in surprise. "Raised your salary, promoted you. Stephen, don't tell me I've been fired already." Stephen gave the surprised woman one last twirl and walked on. She stared after him. Crazy. Find something to be happy about. Fired. It turns out that family life is over too. She shook her head and hurried away, that's all. That's the kind of news you don't get on the road. Stephen had a conversation with his wife ahead of him. He understood perfectly well that he could not expect any good from this conversation, but he was ready. What was it to endure her squeals for an hour or less when he'd endured them for so many years? "Jean, I expected a very different turn." She was sure that her husband would come and apologize and urge her to talk to her father. She'd already prepared a lot of phrases to hurt her husband, but when he came home, she saw no trace of remorse. Jean sat back in her chair and turned away defiantly, but Stephen walked past her and pulled out his large suitcase. For 5 minutes, she just watched him in amazement. Then she came over. "What are you doing?" "Packing." "Why?" "But I think you'll at least think about it before you do." "I'm leaving, and I'm doing it with great pleasure." Jean was confused. Everything was not going at all according to plan. Not according to her plan, but to lose face is not a matter of losing face. "That's right. Go back to where we got you out of." Stephen turned to her. "You know I will." Jean was completely confused, but he picked up the suitcase and headed for the exit. "I'll file the papers myself." Stephen did not even expect that traveling by train would have such a positive effect on his psyche. Everything in the compartment was decorated in a modern style, and he enjoyed looking out the window, behind which flashed colorful summer landscapes. All the unpleasant things had faded into the background, and he no longer cared about his work at the clinic or his frantic wife. It was time for lunch. The man grabbed his jacket and opened the compartment door. At that time, a young woman was just passing by. It was easy to guess from her figure that she was pregnant. With a doctor's experienced eye, he determined that the lady was about to give birth. He had always been against any traveling of pregnant women in the last month. That's why even now, when he saw the negligent mother, he couldn't help himself and said loudly, "But where, tell me, will she go when she is going to give birth any day now?" That mom's went. The sun was flooding the carriage of the fast train, so the doctor did not immediately see the woman's face. She was the first to recognize it. "Doctor, what meeting?" "Oh my goodness, I was going to visit my family." "And you are?" Stephen was a little confused. The journalist Evelyn was nothing like the shy girl in the ridiculous blouse he interviewed. "I have to check on someone too, and I just want to get away. I'm tired of work." "I'm tired too. You know, I've been sent all the time to places where I can't go. And everyone's demanding. Evelyn, it's so annoying that I was so happy to be pregnant. By the way, about your situation, shouldn't you be hitting the road?" "Oh, doctor, it's not a plane, it's a train. Nothing's going to happen to me." "Allow me an indiscreet question. Where's your husband?" "Kevin." "Is he working?" "He hasn't been released. And you shouldn't have risked it." Stephen thought to himself, "Kindergarten, by God." Out loud, he said, "If memory serves me correctly." "Evelyn." "Aha. You're trying to walk less. When's your due date?" "Oh, it's still 2 weeks away." The doctor didn't say anything to the girl, but thought to himself it would be good if the contractions started in a couple of days, not sooner. The man went to a restaurant, where he had a wonderful lunch. He was accompanied by a doctor he knew, with whom they had crossed paths several times at health meetings. They drank a glass of good wine and talked about the problems of modern medicine. When the interlocutor learned that at the moment Stephen is out of work, he even rejoiced. "Colleague, you have God sent me. We're short-staffed. You could say we're suffocating. There's not a single competent specialist in the maternity ward. Here's my card. I'll be waiting for your call." After dinner, Stephen went to his car, which was at the head of the train, and Stephen went to his own. But on the way to his carriage, he heard the frightened shout of the conductor. "Gentlemen, comrades, there is a doctor among you." A woman giving birth to a doctor rushed forward to the compartment the conductor was pointing to. "Are you a doctor? Let me through. You know, there's something wrong. I've delivered babies once before, but there's something wrong with this girl. Something wrong. Don't yell at me. She seems conscious, but she's not responding or answering questions. She's not even screaming. Everybody screams during labor. I know. She's not screaming. Shouldn't we tell the trainmaster?" "Yes, absolutely. Tell them to stop the train at the nearest station and have an ambulance there." The conductor was about to run, but the doctor stopped her. "One more thing, please. There's a colleague of mine in the third car. Could you please call him? Because it's going to be difficult to manage alone." "Of course, doctor. We have a satellite link. We'll be in touch in a moment." At almost 2 o'clock, the doctor stayed with the girl. A friend of Stephen said, "And she should be drained. I'm afraid we're gonna lose our mom. Colleague, we'll try to make it on our own." especially soon the station. The passengers were excitedly discussing this unusual incident. Some gave examples from their own lives. Finally, there was a loud scream, and everyone shouted hooray. A man was born. The tired doctors also rejoiced at the successful resolution of the situation. Stephen asked the happy mother, "Do you even have diapers and clothes for the baby?" "Yes," powerless from the excitement, but smiling. "No, I didn't bring anything. I was told by the counselor that it's 2 more weeks." The conductor found a way out. "I have sterile diapers and diapers in my stash, just in case. Let's get you over here, quick." The doctor started rubbing the baby's body and noticed a small birthmark on his right breast. His eyes immediately went black. "Colleague, what's wrong?" A doctor he knew was offering him a bribe. "Wait, it happens. It's probably the pressure from the stress." "Well, maybe." Stephen looked at the baby and couldn't believe it was happening to him. And with a loud cry, the newborn broadcast to the world that there was one more person on the planet. Good value for the price, he scores 8.95. Such a high estimate was given to the newborn by Sterepo's colleague, who had no idea what was going on in his heart. Half an hour later, the train stopped at the station. The carriage was immediately entered by doctors. On the platform, Stephen saw the ambulance and resolutely took his jacket from a hanger. He would reach it later, but now he would get off with Evelyn. In such a backwater, it was unknown whether there were any good doctors either. Evelyn was already lying on the stretcher. The girl, a nurse, wraps the baby carefully. "Oh, Stephen, I didn't thank you, but now you have. You don't know how grateful I am. I'm such a fool. But you could have waited." "I didn't. I thought once the baby's born, I won't be able to get to my mom for a long time. So I thought I'd go away for a few days." "Yes, your behavior is completely irresponsible." Evelyn smiled weakly. "Every time you and I meet, you rid me like a child." Stephen thought about the fact that Evelyn had just told the real truth. Well, that's just the way it is. He needs to find out what's even going on. The birthmark is too object to be a mere coincidence. Stephen tried to remember if his family had ever talked about Kamyshin. And the more he thought, the more he realized that only in connection with his work. On the other hand, Evelyn and her relatives could have come to this town from somewhere else entirely. "Do you get off at this station?" The young mother's voice brought him back to reality. "Yes, I'm afraid you may not get the help you need here." Those eyes didn't get huge. "So you're here for me, are you?" "Well, you could say it's for my peace of mind. I'm the one who delivered the baby. So I need to make sure you're okay." "Thank you so much. I've already called my husband, and he'll be here tonight." Oh, how he screamed. He was so scared. He was right to be. How could he even let you go? Evelyn smiled. He wouldn't let go. He was totally against it. "But you don't listen to anyone." "Why not?" "I do." Sometimes he laughed. "And Evelyn is very interesting and funny." The orderlies and took up the stretcher. Stephen picked up his suitcase and Evelyn's things. There was no maternity hospital in this godforsaken place, just a small wooden hospital with a children's ward. "I'm sorry, doctor." There was an old woman looking at him. She reminded him of the very doctor's assistant who had once met his young doctor in Kamyshin. "Yes, I'm a doctor. Who can I talk to?" "Well, Rick's at the clinic right now. He'll be here soon." "What, he's a receptionist and works here at the same time. But since he's the only one here, we're just waiting for his son to finish school, God willing. Then we'll have a strong 2 doctors." Stephen chuckled involuntarily. "Whole 2. It's not just 1, Rick. I'll go to the labor and delivery room, but go put on the booties." The woman handed him the booties. It was obvious he wasn't their first host. Stephen, gritting his teeth, "What's the matter?" Evelyn was lying by the window, which was open. There was no one else in the room. He silently put the things that no one in the hospital even paid attention to, and rolled the bed with the young mom farther away. The girl looked at him embarrassed. "You take care of me like that? I'm not even comfortable." "Stop it. You don't need to think about anything at all right now, just yourself and the baby. What are you going to name it? We haven't even thought about it yet. When my husband gets here, we'll decide. He heard some noise in the corridor, thought it was Rick, and he was not mistaken. The door swung open. But who do we have here? Rick was exactly as he had imagined. Stephen, short, with close-cropped hair and very lively eyes. And you must be the metropolitan doctor who delivered the baby. That's right. Well, Nanochka will take the tests now, and we can have a chat. They went out into the corridor. The nurse's station was empty. Somewhere else. We don't have any sick people here, just someone who refuses to go to the city hospital. But don't worry, we have everything we need. Rick talked himself through the ward doors, opening them one by one, to find the thread. Finally, in one of the rooms, he saw her. Nana, the girl, who had been reading the book with rapt attention, flinched. That Rick, he so seemed to tease her that Stephen involuntarily smiled. Where are you supposed to be? But Rick, she ran out of breath when she saw that the doctor was not alone. Quickly, she jumped up and headed for the post. They followed. So in the 6th room of a woman in labor with a baby answer head to get everything done and get diapers, skates. You don't have to. I'm going now. I'll buy everything. And I think tomorrow we can already transport them to the city. Well, the mom, obviously. It's a little early for the baby. I'm gonna get changed and go for a checkup. Are you coming with me? If it's okay, yes. Surprisingly, both Evelyn and the baby were doing well. Stephen smiled, but when her husband would arrive, she didn't answer. Probably only by evening, he decided to pick up his mom. That's a detour of almost 100 kilometers. Stephen's heart sank. That evening, he could probably find out where the child got such an object birthmark. I wonder if it's on her husband's line or Evelyn's. So far, he had no idea how he was going to do it, what questions to ask. He still went to the store. Strangely enough, there were 2 in the village. And in one of them, he was able to buy almost everything he needed. Evelyn shook her hands when she saw what he had brought. Oh, Kevin, everything is lucky. You tell me, how much do I owe? I have money. I'll pay it all back later. Now think about milk and feeding your baby. Toward evening, Rick invited Stephen into his office. You've been on your feet all day. Let's go get something to eat. They sat down at the resident's desk. Stephen looked around. It feels like you live here. Rick laughed. You're almost right. As you can imagine, I'm the only doctor here. It's a bit of a grind. When my son lived at home with me, at least I had something to do. Now he's away at school, so I can devote all my time to my work. Pardon my indiscretion, but what about your wife? Valichka, no, not for more than 10 years. It's just the way it is. I treat people. I couldn't cure my wife. Sorry, nothing. They had just had time to eat dinner when Nina came knocking. Your woman in labor is in there. She's out of her mind. Stephen and Rick jumped out of their seats. They flew into the room just as Evelyn was trying to wrap the baby in a blanket. She was barely on her feet, sobbing, but she carried the baby anyway. Evelyn, what are you doing? Stephen took the boy from her. Evelyn looked at him with mad eyes. I need, you know. There's Kevin and Mommy. They've been in an accident. Stephen shivered. How do you know? I just got a call. Okay, don't panic. You don't know who's hurt or how badly. We need to find out first. Where are you and the baby going? What can you do for them? Just the baby. And you won't get far on your own. Rick was about to say something, but Nina came into the room. Rick, they'd brought 2 people in from the accident. They said they were taking them closer to the village immediately. Kevin's mom. Rick looked at Stephen. Can you give me a hand? Sure. He turned to Evelyn. Listen to me carefully. Evelyn, we'll do whatever we need to do. But please stay in the room with the baby so we don't have to worry about you. Only if we don't have to be distracted can we help your family. That's understood. Evelyn nodded. Rick rushed out of the room, throwing on the way. Nina Stephen ran after me. Evelyn's husband wasn't hurt very badly. After a cursory examination, it was clear that he had a couple of fractures and a few cuts that needed stitches. Nina escorted Stephen and Kevin into the examination room, where Stephen took over. He didn't know what was wrong with the woman because Rick and the EMT had rushed her somewhere down the hall. Kevin, writhing in pain, asked, "Tell me, my wife, how is she? Is she with you? She gave birth on the train." "Don't worry, Evelyn's fine." "What are you in for now? Can you talk to her?" "No, I'm not going." Stephen looked at the young man in surprise. "Why is that?" "What am I gonna tell her? I killed your mom. My wife's mom was riding with me. Who knows what happened to the steering wheel? It just started spinning freely at one point. No action on the wheels. But her mom's alive. Why are you burying her before her time? She's very hurt. I saw it. A landmine came through the door. Stephen, I'm asking you to come here urgently. I'll finish up here. There's a sign at the very end of the hall. Block." Kevin gave a startled gasp, and Stephen rushed down the hall. Rick was administering an IV to a woman. "Stephen, I don't know what to do. The damage was mostly to the abdomen. It's a huge loss. But that's not even the worst part. Something's damaged. She keeps losing blood. I've already contacted the city hospital, and they're sending a crash cart. But it'll be here in about 3 hours, at the earliest. They're bringing blood, and they're bringing a surgeon and a team. Even if they make it, which I highly doubt, we can't take her anyway. She'll die on the way. What are your thoughts?" "No thoughts. 10, 15 years ago, I would have said we should operate. There are no conditions, but human life now, I understand perfectly well that we can't do anything in such conditions without the right equipment." Stephen began to examine the woman. "Rick, I think we should try it." And then he hesitated. He looked at the woman's face. Vanessa. Rick turned to him in surprise. "Do you two know each other?" And then something clicked in Stephen's head, and everything fell into place. Vanessa Evelyn, the baby with the birthmark. No, it can't be. It can't be. "Stephen, there's nothing wrong with you." He looked at Rick with crazy eyes. "Is there anyone else we can call for help? Our nurse is old, but she's been an operating room nurse for years. Ninochka is inexperienced, but she's a good thinker. And 2 nurses who also work here. Page everyone. Let's get ready for surgery." Rick stood there for a second, looking at Sterhepo. "Are you sure?" "Yeah. We need to find the source of the bleeding. Then maybe they'll come in from the city." Rick jumped out of the office. Out of the hallway, his voice came out. "Quickly, we're gonna get everybody into surgery right away." Stephen stood looking at Vanessa. How many years? It was over 20. Vanessa's face was pale, but he could still see that the years had not changed her much. Rick returned and Stephen went to change. In the hallway, he met a startled Evelyn. Tell me, how's Mom?" He looked at the girl, then took her hand. "I'm not going to lie to you. It's pretty bad. There's a car on its way to us from town, but they might just not make it in time." Down the hallway toward them, Kevin was hobbling toward them. "Evelyn." She turned around, threw herself into a hug. "Kevin, do something, please." He stroked her hair and looked at Stephen in silence. "Vanessa's O positive needs blood. I'm AB positive." Kevin, like in high school, raised his hand. "You can take it. I can take anything. Just save her," Evelyn cried, then raised her eyes to Stephen. "How do you know what kind of blood Mommy has?" Kevin looked at him too. "And how do you know what her name is?" "I didn't tell you." "Did you leave your papers in the car?" Stephen sighed. "We knew her once." Evelyn suddenly stopped crying. "How long ago was that?" "A long time ago, over 20 years ago." "Evelyn, I'll be sure to answer all your questions." But then Kevin followed me. Rick wasn't much. 1. And I called my colleagues in the area. He'll be in touch if he has any tips. Great. Let's get started. About 5 minutes after the operation began, 2 more girls appeared next to them. The assistant had already laid out the tools. Now Stephen would not have recognized this elderly woman with her concentrated face, the very almost grandmother who met him. After an hour and a half, they moved away from the table. Rick looked at everyone. "Thank you, colleagues. What we have all accomplished today is a true miracle. Now we just have to wait." Stephen stepped out into the hallway. He realized that he had to go and talk to Evelyn. Kevin was taken to her room. The conversation would probably not be very pleasant, but it could not be avoided. He pulled off his cap, pushed open the door of the room. Evelyn immediately jumped up. Mom's alive. I think everything will be all right now. The colleagues from the city will be here soon." Next to Kevin on the bed was a baby boy. The man looked at him fondly, almost unblinking. But when he heard Stephen, he raised himself up on one elbow. "Thank you, doctor, but I wasn't the only one there. Rick, what a god. It amazes me how many things one man can do in this town. A stomach doctor would never treat a cold." He sat down on the bed. Evelyn looked at him without looking away. "That's not all you wanted to tell us." He nodded. Then he looked up at Evelyn. "Evelyn, what blood type are you?" "Third negative." "Yeah. How do you know?" "I'm the same." She sat down next to him and looked confusedly at her hands, then at her husband. Kevin sat down too. "Am I to understand correctly that you are now going to tell us that Evelyn is your daughter?" Stephen shrugged his shoulders. "Apparently, yes. Really, I didn't know anything myself. I had all sorts of thoughts when I took in the big boy. He has the same birthmark as all the men in our line. But I didn't even think in that direction. Was going to find out, of course, through whom that birthmark came, through Evelyn or through Kevin." Then Vanessa saw it. Evelyn stood up. "And I always knew my daddy was Robert. I don't think you're right. It's just some kind of coincidence. Mom's gonna wake up and find out. Look at this." Kevin carefully turned the baby around with one hand that wasn't very comfortable, so Evelyn rushed over to help him. He was the one who was pointing at a birthmark of a very unusual shape. Stephen silently unbuttoned his shirt and showed the exact same one, only bigger. Evelyn was powerless, sank down on the bed. "What is it?" "Daddy loved me. I never would have guessed." "He did." She looked up at Stephen. "Daddy died when I was 15. There was silence in the room. Stephen stood up. He could feel how tired he was. There just wasn't any energy left. There was a murmur in the hallway. He breathed a sigh of relief. Here came help. Vanessa had regained consciousness already in the car. It was decided to drive her in the morning. Another car was to come for Kevin and Evelyn with the baby. Stephen made the decision to go with Vanessa. He did not immediately decide after Evelyn asked, "You are not going to leave Mommy now. You saved her. Stick around at least until she's safe, sure. Don't worry, Evelyn. I'll be right here." He pulled the girl against him on some impulse, eyes shielding her. He only now suddenly realized that he had a daughter. He had a grandson, but no family. No one needs him. Tanya has everyone beaten, weak and sick, but all together. And he's still alone. Vanessa accused everything around her with a cloudy look, then focused her gaze on him. "You." He barely heard what she said, wanted to answer. Vanessa closed her eyes again. Kamishin met them with rain. Stephen thought that they had basically swapped an awl for a soap. As far as he remembered, the medicine here was also lame. But the car went down some unfamiliar street. Finally, it stopped in front of a beautiful new building and the doors opened. "Vanessa, what the hell is this?" Stephen watched in amazement as the entire staff of the new hospital clustered around Vanessa. He approached the driver. It felt like everyone knew her. The driver grinned. How could they not when she's the head doctor? As head doctor, she's the one who got this hospital from the administration. The building was supposed to be the new home of the officials, so she made it happen. Her daughter was attracted by that journalist or someone else on TV. After the reports, the officials came here and gave the building to them. and brought all the necessary equipment. No one knew Vanessa was hurt. She would have been carried out in their arms. That's weird. Evelyn didn't say anything about the mom being the chief of medicine. Maybe it would have been quicker. Vanessa never takes advantage of her position and forbids everyone. She says when a person moves into the category of patient, they become just a sick person, not a boss or a pipe cleaner. Stephen was confused and depressed. That's the interesting thing about life. It just loves to put people in a dead end. For example, take him back then. Many years ago, he had done an ugly, mean thing, but it was because life had dealt with him that way. Yes, he had to go away alone, because he knew perfectly well that Vanessa would become his ballast. But what if he wanted to accomplish something? He grinned bitterly. He had. At that age, back to where he'd started. So he wouldn't be needed in this hospital, because the saints would be looked after like queens. Then who would want him? The answer was self-evident. No one wanted him at all. He was sure that Evelyn didn't want to see him much either. He decided to get a hotel room, sleep, wash up, then say goodbye to everyone and go. Go where? Probably to Moscow. Something must be done about the dissolution of the marriage. Something must be done about housing. Stephen was sure that Jean would not want to part with a single meter of their housing so easily. But nothing he will fight. Especially now there is someone to fight for. The next day, he found out that Evelyn was being discharged this afternoon, and Kevin called him. Stephen, I don't know what your relationship with Evelyn will be, but you're the reason my son was born. So if you'd like to come down to the local maternity hospital at 200 hours. Thanks, Kevin. I'll be there. You tell me, where can I find a decent baby store in town? The mall on Lennon. I'll be there. I'll definitely be there. And Kevin said, and also, Evelyn, I have kind and fair. You don't think she'll hate you. Thank you, Kevin. You're not a very lucky man. He got his hopes up, called a cab, and rushed to the baby store. He thought long and hard about what to buy. He bought a stroller. He had no idea whether they already had one or not. I figure I'd get two, if anything. Evelyn greeted him with a smile. Hello. I didn't know you were coming. Well, how could I not? Stephen held out the flowers to Evelyn and looked inside the bag. Can I hold them? Help with Kevin's hand. Sure. How many small children has he held? 1,000, maybe more. But now that he had this little living lump in his arms, he wanted to cry. He could hardly contain himself. Not for long, though. My husband and I have decided to name our son Stephen. If it hadn't been for you. That's it. I can't hold back the tears now. Old age, I guess. He walked the happy parents home and headed to the hospital to see Vanessa. He didn't know what he was going to say, but he realized it couldn't be like before. Vanessa would be absolutely right to chase him away and forbid Evelyn from associating with him. Well then, he would leave, but he would still help both his grandson and his daughter. The girl who escorted him to the ward on the way told him that Vanessa Grigorievna is much better. She is already talking. That's good. The girl suddenly stopped. It was you who saved her. No, we all did it together. Everyone who works at the hospital, in that village. Vanessa turned her head at once. Her eyes widened. Stephen closed the door of the room. He came over and sat down on a chair. Hello, Vanessa. Hello, Stephen. So I wasn't dreaming about you. You're the doctor from the capital who saved me. Perhaps I should thank you. You don't have to. It's the least I could do for you. Vanessa, why didn't you tell me? You didn't tell me I didn't understand you. You didn't tell me about Evelyn. So you guessed. But it wasn't hard, considering I delivered the baby and saw the birthmark right away. So there you go. I wanted to tell you. I thought long and hard. I didn't know if you needed that information. But then I decided you had a right to know. I went to Moscow. It wasn't hard to find you. Only that day you had a wedding. I saw you, stood there and left, determined to forget you forever. Robert was waiting for me here, and I told him everything. All he said was he wished he killed you. Didn't kill you then. Stephen grinned. A pity indeed. What is it now? Nothing. Nothing's changed. Evelyn thinks of Robert as her father. Let's keep it that way. Evelyn knows everything. I told her. Vanessa closed her eyes. Why are you going back to Moscow? Why do you have to stir things up now? Stephen got up and walked to the fire. For some reason, I decided I wanted to. There's nothing keeping me there. I'm divorcing my wife. I don't have a job there anymore. I worked at my father-in-law's clinic. So one thing follows from another. I should have stayed then. But maybe it's not too late now. She looked at him closely. You're kidding. No. What jokes? I've realized a lot in these few days I've been here. That's when I gave up everything to go after a better life, leaving you alone. What's the result? Now I got nothing again. No position of disrespect, no family you left behind. And now every man in this town speaks your name with a kind of reverence. You have a daughter and now a grandson. You have everything. I'm not jealous. I mean, it's the right thing to do. You earned it all. And I got what I deserve. Vanessa was silent. He stood for a moment, then moved toward the door. Okay. I'm sorry. Of course you're right. You don't want me to let you in my face. You're absolutely right. It's a good thing I didn't help, didn't raise, and got a grown daughter right away. It would have been too easy. I'll leave tomorrow. I'm sorry. He grabbed the doorknob and heard it. I have a position at the hospital as head of the maternity ward. The current head has been asking for a well-deserved retirement for a year, and I have no one to replace him. He froze, then turned around. Vanessa, you're sure you won't regret your offer? She grinned weakly. Of course I will. Stephen set to work with enthusiasm. At first, for now, all the issues with the division of property. He was given an apartment not far from the hospital. The rent was a pittance. The apartment was quite small, but it was quite decent inside. The first day, he contacted a lawyer he knew in Moscow and told him to start divorce proceedings. Your wife never worked. No, I see where you're going with this. We'll divide everything according to our conscience, but you have to offer her to buy my share because I'm not going back. Oh yeah, so where does the best doctor in the world live now? Stephen laughed where she used to send me and my dad all the time. Everyone on the ward looked at him with a kind of morbid curiosity. He knew exactly why. Not only was he not a local from the capital, but as it turned out, he was an acquaintance of their head doctor. And that was interesting, considering that they were almost the same age. Stephen visited Vanessa every day, under the pretense of talking about work. They both knew that work had nothing to do with it, but they were careful to pretend that it did. After each shift, Stephen stopped by Evelyn's house. She was genuinely happy to see him. And Kevin smiled and said that as soon as his arm was healed, he would take Stephen fishing. Everything was rolling along, but there was still something unfinished in the air. When Vanessa is discharged, everything will fall into place. But he didn't think they could continue to communicate like this. Every day more and more he realized one thing could always be considered lost. And only the time spent next to Vanessa was bright and somehow real. A month passed, and Vanessa, finally, she left the hospital with her own feet and breathed a full breath. God, it felt good. I never understood why patients disliked hospitalization so much. Now I realized Stephen was standing a little apart. He didn't want to disturb them. Evelyn hugged her mother and led her to the car. He sighed. How lucky is it to have someone to hug like that? Stephen walked toward the hospital, but he heard Dad, aren't you with us? He froze. Hearing those words, he slowly turned around. No, there was no mistake. Except for them, there was almost no one on the street. Tunas looked at him and smiled. Let's go. I set the table. Kevin's mom is babysitting Stephen, so we have to hurry, because our son has a temper. And he looked at Vanessa. If she wasn't happy, he'd say no. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable. But Vanessa looked at him calmly, even as if affectionately. I'm going, of course I'm going. I just thought you wanted your family." He rushed toward them. "Dick." The man even stumbled. Only one man had such a nasty voice. "Jean, hadn't you forgotten your wife?" She slammed the door of the expensive car and moved toward them. "Stephen, stop freaking out. We've all been a little overreacting, both Dad and you. But face it, you were wrong first. Dad is willing to take you back if you apologize for what you said." He saw Vanessa's face change. "She's a purse. But we won't get in your way," and moved toward the car. Evelyn stood for a moment and followed her mother. Stephen turned to Jean. "Why did you come here? I don't understand. We've decided everything. I honored your wish and went back there. Where do you think I belong?" "Stephen, enough already. Are you really ready to sacrifice a normal life for all this?" Jean made a vague gesture with her hand. Stephen suddenly calmed down. He followed Kevin's car with his eyes. What didn't escape Jean? "And I did not understand. Have you found yourself a provincial seagull already here?" She laughed. "But you surprised me. I thought you were already incapable of anything. But you're still capable of conquering someone. Well, maybe you're willing to give up everything for some country woman." He came right up to Jean. "Did you get here on time?" "No, really, if I didn't look at you now, at your behavior, I wouldn't have realized what a worthless life I've lived. Tell me, Jean, why do you live? You're of no use to anyone. You leave no one behind. There's a man. But if you take him out of the world, no one will notice. You're that kind of person. Jean, a parasite." The woman even choked with indignation. "Who the hell are you?" "My dad won't let you work here." Stephen laughed. "You just don't browbeat, not out of anger." He almost ran down the sidewalk. Now he knew exactly what he had to do. Somewhere nearby, he saw a convenience store, just what he needed right now. Vanessa was sitting at the table, picking at her plate with her fork. "Mom, you're not eating anything." "I don't feel like it, daughter." She really didn't feel like it. The only thing she wanted to do right now was to curl up in her pillow and sob like what? How could she fall back in love with someone who'd done that to her? Her brain was trying to tell her that she probably never stopped loving him. But Vanessa didn't want to hear those thoughts. Kevin stood up. "I don't believe it. I don't believe it. That's all. Look, he won't go with her. I don't know him that much, but he seemed like a normal guy to me." Vanessa grinned at Kevin. "What's your point? What are they getting at? What do you think, Vanessa, that we don't see anything, don't understand anything? Why did you leave them there? You could have waited. So he thinks we've all abandoned him, and no one wants him here." Evelyn looked at her mother. She thought so too, but she didn't say anything. Vanessa sighed. "The most important thing is whether he needs us, and that can only be decided by him, not his wife. We can't help him with that." She got up. "I'm going to lie down. I'm tired." Vanessa didn't make it to her room before the doorbell rang. Who could it be? "Kevin, open up. Maybe someone's here to see you." Kevin shrugged. Who could be here to see them if they lived in another city, and all their friends are there? He opened the door and smiled broadly. "I knew you'd come." "Vanessa, where?" "In the room." Stephen was barely visible behind the huge bouquet of roses. He quickly threw off his jacket and moved into the room. Kevin followed him. Vanessa looked at him in surprise. He handed her the flowers. She took the bouquet out of surprise and then knelt down and handed Vanessa the box with the ring. "Vanessa, I should have done this years ago, but I was cowardly. I acted like a pig and not a man. I'm asking if you can. I'm sorry if you can't. I'm prepared to take reproach from you for the rest of my life. But I'm begging you, marry me. I'm not divorced yet, but it's only a matter of time. I can't do it without you. I've been thinking that only the time we've been together has any meaning at all." Vanessa looked at Stephen confused and surprised at the same time. She certainly realized that he felt something for her, but to give her a ring like that without a second thought. "But, Mom, how many times? You love him. We can see that." Evelyn couldn't help herself. And as if to confirm her words, little Stephen, who was being held by Kevin, farted loudly, yes, so that it was distinct. Aha! They laughed. Stephen held on the longest, but after a minute he was laughing with everyone else. Vanessa, wiping away the tears that had come from laughter, or something else, said to wash the dishes one at a time. Stephen grinned, ready to take on that responsibility completely. Vanessa immediately replied, "Don't let anyone hold your tongue." He laughed and was finally able to pull Vanessa against him. He could feel her heart pounding, or maybe it was pounding with his heart. It didn't matter. They were still beating in unison.